When Britain burned. You can smell it before you see it. Smoke, thick and bitter, rolling across the countryside. The kind of smoke that doesn't come from hearth fires or cooking pits, but from cities, Roman cities. Temples collapse in on themselves, roofs crashing into streets already slick with blood. Statues of emperors crack and shatter, faces breaking into pieces that vanish beneath stampeding feet. Soldiers drop their shields and run. Citizens scream in languages the attackers do not care to understand. And at the center of it all, not a Roman general, not a conquering emperor, but a woman standing in a chariot, hair blazing like fire in the wind, calling her people forward. Her name is Boudica, a queen, a mother. And for one violent moment in history, the greatest threat the Roman Empire had ever faced in Britain. 3 cities will burn. Tens of thousands will die. Rome will panic, governors will flee, and messengers will ride day and night, carrying news no one in the empire wants to hear. Britain has risen, and a woman is leading it. But before the ashes, before the massacres, before Rome learns to fear her name, Boudica was not a warlord. She was a queen who tried to live within Rome's rules. And Rome repaid her with humiliation. The queen who tried to play nice. Before she became the face of rebellion, Boudica was the queen of the Iceni, a powerful Celtic tribe in what is now eastern England. She ruled beside her husband, King Prasutagus, in a Britain that had already been swallowed by Rome's expanding hunger. Rome had a system for places like this. They didn't always crush local rulers. Sometimes they kept them on a leash. Client kings, they called them. Local rulers who kept order, collected taxes, and bowed politely to Roman authority in exchange for limited autonomy. Prasutagus played the game. He paid tribute, he kept the peace. He believed, naively, that loyalty might protect his people. When he died, he tried to secure that protection one last time. In his will, he left his kingdom jointly to Rome and to his 2 daughters, hoping the empire would respect his family and allow his line to continue. Rome did not even pretend to consider it. Instead, Roman officials arrived like vultures. They seized Iceni lands. They looted noble estates. They declared the kingdom forfeit, as if Prasutagus had never ruled at all. And then they sent a message no treaty could misunderstand. Boudica was publicly flogged. Her daughters were assaulted by Roman soldiers, not in secret, not by accident, but as punishment, as demonstration, as a reminder of who truly held power now. This wasn't chaos, this was policy. Rome was showing Britain what happened to families who believed they mattered. And in that moment, something inside Boudica snapped. They had not just stolen her throne, they had violated her children. They had stripped her people of law, dignity, and safety. Rome had crossed the one line that turns obedience into fury, and Boudica decided that if Rome wanted to rule through terror, then terror was exactly what it would get in return. A mother turns the tribes into an army. Boudica does not run. She does not beg Rome for mercy. She does not try to bargain for scraps of dignity. She does something far more dangerous. She speaks. Across the forests and fields of eastern Britain, messengers carry word that the Iceni queen is calling a gathering. Not a feast, not a council, a reckoning. Tribes arrive who have their own bruises from Roman rule. The Trinovantes, whose lands were seized for Roman veterans. Farmers taxed into hunger. Warriors forced to watch temples rise where their sacred groves once stood. They come angry. They come armed. They come ready. And Boudica stands before them, not in silk or ceremony, but in battle dress, tall, wild-haired, her daughters beside her, so no one forgets why this war is happening. Roman writers later claimed she gave speeches like a barbarian queen out of myth. But what she really did was simple. She told the truth. She told them about the flogging, about her daughters, about the theft of their lands and the laws that no longer protected them. She told them Rome did not see them as allies, only as resources. And then she asked a question that cracked the air open. If we must live as slaves, why not die as free people? That question spread faster than any sword. Men swore oaths. War bands pledged themselves. Entire villages emptied as people joined her march. This was not just revenge anymore. This was uprising. And Rome, fat and confident in its new province, did not see it coming. The first city to burn. Their first target was Camulodunum, a Roman colony, a symbol of conquest, a city built on confiscated native land, crowned by a massive temple to the Emperor Claudius, paid for by local tribes who hated every stone of it. It was protected by walls, but not by soldiers. When Boudica's army surged out of the forests, the city panicked. Citizens barricaded themselves inside the temple, believing Rome's god would protect them. It didn't. The rebels burned the city to the ground. Men, women, soldiers, settlers, no one was spared. Roman accounts later dripped with horror, but they never mentioned the decades of theft and violence that lit the match. Rome finally understood what was happening, and it understood too late. London falls next. As news spread, panic tore through Roman Britain. The governor, Suetonius Paulinus, rushed back from campaigns in Wales, gathering what troops he could. But he did not have enough men. When Boudica's forces approached Londinium, young, rich, and completely unfortified, Suetonius made a brutal decision. He abandoned it, left the city to its fate. Those who could run, ran. Those who stayed, died. London burned. Then, Verulamium. 3 cities erased in days. By the time the fires died, Roman Britain was in shock. Estimates said 70 to 80,000 people were dead.
And suddenly, the most disciplined military machine in the world was being humiliated by tribal warriors led by a woman they had once whipped in public. Rome did not forgive humiliation, and now it was done being surprised. Rome prepares to strike back. Suetonius regrouped. He chose the battlefield carefully, narrow ground where Boudica's massive army could not surround his smaller, better-trained force. He lined his soldiers in tight formation, disciplined, armored, ready to remind Britain what empire looks like when it stops playing defense. Across from him stood a rebel army, swollen with confidence and fury, families and wagons drawn up behind them to witness what they believed would be their final victory. Boudica rode before her troops once more. She reminded them of what they had lost, what they had already taken back, what waited if Rome won. And then she charged. But this time, Rome was ready. The battle that broke the rebellion. The field is wrong. Boudica feels it before the first spear is thrown. The ground is narrow, hemmed in by trees, with no open flanks to pour around the enemy. No room for the wild, rolling charge her army has used to crush cities. Across the field, Roman soldiers stand in perfect silence, not shouting, not boasting, not afraid. Shields locked, spears ready, faces hidden behind iron. They look less like men and more like a wall that learned how to breathe. Behind Boudica's army, the wagons are drawn up in a half circle. Families, elders, children, all watching, all certain they are about to witness Rome finally fall. There is no retreat now, only forward. When fury meets formation. The Britons surge first. A tidal wave of bodies, paint and war cries slams into Roman lines. For a moment, it looks like the wall might crack. But Rome does not fight like a storm. It fights like a machine. Pilum javelins fly in tight volleys, punching through shields and flesh, skewering men who never even reach sword range. Then the Romans advance. Not chasing, not scattering, advancing. Step, thrust, shield, step again. The front ranks of Boudica's army begin to collapse under the discipline. Warriors trip over the fallen. Momentum jams into its own dead. And then comes the worst realization of all. The wagons are blocking the rear. There is nowhere to run. the slaughter. What began as rebellion turns into massacre. Roman cavalry sweeps the sides, infantry drives forward. Britons are pressed into killing fields where courage cannot compete with coordination. Mothers die beside sons. Warriors fall tangled in their own banners. Victory rots into chaos. Boudica fights on, somewhere in the crush, still mounted, still commanding, still refusing to accept that this is how it ends. But it is ending, and she knows it. Roman historians would later call it a glorious victory. They would not call it what it was: extermination.
A queen's last choice. Accounts of what happens next differ. Some say Boudica fled. Some say she was wounded. But most agree on this: she did not allow Rome to take her alive. According to tradition, she drank poison. Not in panic, not in fear, but as one final act of control in a life where control had been stolen, beaten, and reclaimed with fire. Her daughters disappear from the record after that, their fate unknown. Rome erased them as efficiently as it erased the rebellion. Rome wins the war, but not the story. Rome rebuilt the burned cities, re-established taxes, reasserted law, re-punished the tribes. On paper, the empire had won, but something had shifted. For years afterward, Roman governors ruled Britain carefully, nervously, aware now that submission was not permanent and that fury could ignite from a single injustice. Boudica had not destroyed Roman Britain, but she had wounded its confidence, and empires hate nothing more than being shown they can bleed. How Rome tried to bury her, and failed. Rome did what Rome always did after crushing resistance. It told the story its way. No songs for the dead, no monuments for the fallen, no public grief allowed to turn into memory. Instead, there were reports, military summaries, casualty numbers, administrative language that reduces entire nations to pacified regions. Boudica does not appear in Roman records as a queen. She appears as a problem that was solved, a disturbance, a flare-up, an unfortunate episode of provincial unrest. Rome preferred its enemies small on the page, even when they had once set half the island on fire. From warrior to warning. When Roman historians did write about her, the tone shifted. Tacitus described her as fierce, vengeful, dangerous, a woman driven by wild emotion rather than strategy. Cassius Dio added drama, towering height, terrifying eyes, voice like thunder. They painted her as spectacle, not leader, not tactician, not politician responding to Roman brutality, just a furious woman who lost control. Which was convenient, because if Boudica was madness, then Rome was order. If Boudica was hysteria, then Rome was civilization. The narrative did not ask why she rose, only how violently she fell, erasing her from the land. No statues, no official memorials. Roman towns were rebuilt directly over the ash of burned ones, as if paving over trauma could delete it. Temples rose where mass graves lay. Markets reopened where screams had once echoed. The message was clear: this never happened. And if it did, it doesn't matter now. But history doesn't obey governors. It obeys memory. The ghost that wouldn't leave. Among the Britons, her name did not disappear. It passed through families, through stories told at night, through warnings about Rome whispered to children, not as legend yet, as reminder that Rome could be hurt, that submission was not destiny, that a woman once stood up and made the world shake. Even when rebellion failed, defiance. From threat to myth. Centuries later, after Rome itself fell, Boudica began to change shape. Medieval chroniclers revived her as a tragic heroine. Renaissance writers turned her into a moral lesson. Victorian England crowned her a patriotic symbol. Suddenly, she was useful, safe, a queen who could be celebrated once her rage no longer threatened anyone alive. Statues appeared, poems were written,
school children memorized her name. But the raw truth, that she rose because Rome brutalized women and dismantled native leadership, was softened, smoothed, and often ignored. They loved her courage, they forgot her cause. What Rome never understood. Rome believed killing Boudica ended the rebellion, but rebellions don't live only in bodies, they live in precedent. She proved something dangerous, that empire is not fate, that obedience is not natural, that even the most powerful machine in the world can be shaken by someone who refuses to kneel. And she proved something even more threatening, that leadership does not require permission, especially not from men who profit from silence. Was it worth it? And why we still say her name? Rome won the war. That part is not in dispute. The legions remained. The towns were rebuilt. Britain stayed Roman for centuries. By every imperial metric, Boudica failed. But empires measure victory in territory. People measure it in meaning, and those are not the same thing. Victory is not the only outcome. Boudica did not reclaim her kingdom. She did not secure safety for her daughters. She did not live to see Rome retreat. But she did something far rarer. She made domination visible. She forced Rome to reveal itself not as civilizer, but as occupier. After the rebellion, Roman governors changed their behavior, not because they became kinder, but because they became cautious. They learned that humiliation had consequences, that stripping noble families of land could spark war, that women were not invisible in the political order of conquered peoples. Rome adjusted its grip. That is not nothing. That is the shadow of influence stretching beyond the grave. The psychology of defiance. Here's the uncomfortable truth about rebellion. It rarely succeeds in the moment. It succeeds by changing what people believe is possible. Before Boudica, Rome seemed inevitable. After Boudica, Rome seemed powerful, but not untouchable. And that difference matters. Once people know authority can be challenged, even unsuccessfully, obedience is never quite the same again. Fear cracks, hope leaks in, and empires hate that.
What about her daughters? History is cruelly silent here. We don't know what became of them, no names recorded, no futures preserved. Only the knowledge that they were violated, used as symbols of conquest, and then erased from the record. And maybe that is the most Roman ending of all. The empire that claimed to bring law and order could not be bothered to remember the girls whose suffering ignited a war. Which makes Boudica's rebellion feel less like ambition and more like maternal fury sharpened into policy. Not glory, not conquest, protection, attempted at the only scale she had left. From queen to archetype. Over time, Boudica stopped being only a person. She became a shape in the human imagination. The warrior mother, the woman who burns cities rather than bow, the embodiment of rage that refuses to be polite. She appears whenever people feel trapped by power that claims to be permanent, not just in Britain, in every place where the strong insist the weak accept their position quietly. Boudica becomes shorthand for a dangerous idea, that oppression can create leaders it never intended to face. Why empires fear her still. Rome tried to shrink her into a footnote. Historians tried to soften her into legend, but she keeps returning in stories, statues, and slogans, for one reason. She reminds us that systems built on domination are always more fragile than they look. They depend on compliance, on shame, on convincing people that resistance is pointless. Boudica broke that illusion, not forever, but long enough to matter. The quiet, terrible power of no. Boudica did not ask for reform. She did not negotiate. She did not try to fit into Roman expectations of womanhood, widowhood, or royalty. She said no, to humiliation, to dispossession, to silence. And she said it loudly enough that the greatest empire on earth had to answer her with armies. That alone tells you how dangerous she was. So, was it worth it? If you measure by survival, the answer is brutal. If you measure by territory,
the answer is no. But if you measure by what people carried forward, by the knowledge that injustice can be answered with fire instead of silence, by the proof that leadership can rise from grief and fury and still move armies, then Boudica never really lost. She became memory, and memory outlives legions.
The kind of woman history can't digest. History prefers women who adapt, who endure quietly, who survive by accommodating power. Boudica refused that script. She did not survive. She confronted. And because of that, she unsettles us. Not because she was violent. History is full of violent men we celebrate, but because she was unapologetic. She did not seek permission to be furious. She did not apologize for making herself impossible to ignore. She burned herself into the record, and in doing so, she left behind a warning older than Rome and louder than empire. You can take land, you can take crowns, you can take lives, but you cannot take what a story does once it starts moving. And Boudica's story is still moving. And that's where we leave her. On the page, in the archive, in the rumor, in the shadow she carved into history. Maybe she was a villain. Maybe she was a victim. Maybe she was something far more dangerous. A woman who refused the role she was handed. But one thing is certain. The world wasn't ready for her then, and it still isn't now. If you enjoyed falling down this rabbit hole of power, defiance, and the women history tried to bury, make sure you're here for the next chapter, because there are more of them, more rebels, more survivors, more legends disguised as scandals. Until next time, keep questioning the stories you were told, and keep an eye on the women they warned you about.